Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about rethinking Eldar Wraithlords in 10th edition. So I wanted to do this video because I really felt that Wraithlords were in a little bit of an awkward place this edition, especially when the edition started out. Because at the time, there was just seemingly better options, right? People would go with the Wraith Knight, obviously, and the Wraith Knight was just super overpowered, and there was really nothing that competed well with it for its cost when the edition came out. Over time, it has been nerfed, and now the Wraith Knight is basically back on the shelf. So with that, a lot of new options have opened up, including the Wraithlord. However, people still aren't taking the Wraithlord, and I think it has to do with the fact that the conventional way in which we think about equipping the Wraithlord is actually wrong this edition. So conventional knowledge would say, well, we should give it the most potent anti-large weapons it can possibly carry because of the unparalleled foresight, detachment bonus. But the more I play with this thing and the more I use that build this edition, it's gotten me really thinking that, a 4+ versus a 3+ over the course of many games is a very big deal. And there have been turns where my Wraithlord has missed twice and missed again because of ballistic skill 4+. Now, even though there are ways to increase his ballistic skill, like a Spirit Seer, for example, or, Guide and stuff like that, I'm kind of thinking that it's not the most efficient model for its cost in that given role. I mean, keep in mind, we can get a Hornet or a Warwalker for a fraction of the cost and get better Lance firepower out of them because they hit on 3+. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm basically going to be talking about rethinking how we're equipping the Wraithlord and if 2 Bright Lances are really the best way to go this edition. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right into the video. But first, a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at the Wraithlord's stats, weapons, and special rules, its strengths and weaknesses, combos and synergies, and why the conventional Wraithlord build in 10th edition may actually be trash. And lastly, of course, we're going to review the role of the Wraithlord in an Eldar army and how to make the most out of it. So starting with its stats, pretty standard movement. It's kind of on the slower side for monsters at movement 8, but it is very tough. At toughness 11 and a 2+ save, it's going to be weathering fire pretty easily. So anything, strength 11 or below is typically going to have a hard time wounding it. And it does have 10 wounds, which is pretty solid. As for its ranged weapons, it does have flamers, so you can give it 2 flamers. Flamers are effective at killing light infantry, which also auto-hit, and this is a big help on a lower ballistic skill model. I think flamers are actually the way to go on this thing. They also ignore cover. The missile launcher is a versatile weapon, decent at killing infantry and lighter large targets, so, light vehicles, light monsters, and also light infantry. The Bright Lances, which are kind of the topic of discussion, are good versus large targets, but, their viability on the Wraithlord is a little bit suspect. Scatter lasers are effective against light infantry, being, lots of shots at low strength and no AP, and shuriken cannons are effective against medium to heavy infantry. But they do have a shorter range, so you do have to keep that in mind when using the shuriken cannons. They can also be given the shuriken catapults instead of the flamers. They do have a higher range, slightly more AP, but they don't auto-hit and have less attack. So I think overall the shuriken catapults are a much worse option. The Star Cannon is a pretty good mech killer, so good at killing Space Marines. Anything really toughness 4 with a good armor save, it's going to be very good at killing, especially if that target does not have an invul save. So I do like the Star Cannon. The number of shots it has is kind of low, though, and that's something you have to keep in mind with using the Star Cannon, that it might suffer a similar fate to the Bright Lance in that it's not that reliable. As for the Wraithlord's melee weapons, a Ghostglaive is the melee weapon you want to take. You never want to take the Wraithbone Fists. They're the base option, and there's no advantage to taking them. The Sweep on the Ghostglaive is effective against lighter infantry, and the Strike is more effective against heavier targets, so toughness 10 or less. Typically, you want to always go with the Strike, unless you're going against something that is toughness 3. Or has a very poor armor save. So, again, this is one of those things where the Sweep looks like it's good against Marines because it has damage 2 and AP -2, but the Ghostglaive is just better as it wounds on 2+ against most targets, and it's going to do more damage. So it's better against things like Terminators and stuff like that because, it can bring them to its invul save, wound them on a 2+ still, and still pop them in one hit. Now, the thing about the strike, though, that people have to understand is that at strength 10, it's going to be wounding anything with toughness 11 or 12 on a 5+. So that means the Wraithlord, unlike last edition, is not good at killing heavy targets. So before it was kind of like basically everything was less toughness than the Ghostglaive, basically the Wraithlord. So you wounded everything on 3s. So you had a good chance of going in there and basically just destroying whatever you hit in close combat. But now, since the Wraithlord has a lower weapon skill and it's hitting heavier targets worse, basically, because it has a lower comparative strength, you can't expect the Wraithlord to take on heavy targets anymore. Which is also another reason why I think maybe we're thinking about the Bright Lances in the wrong way, that, it's maybe not the best option to take with the Wraithlord, because maybe the Wraithlord isn't really built for taking out heavy targets. As for its abilities, it does gain a fate dice for every unit destroyed. So if this destroys a unit, you gain a fate dice. It's a pretty good ability. I've used it successfully many times in a game. I can usually get about 2 fate dice per game if I'm using my Wraithlord correctly. So that is cool. You do want to save his shooting attacks and, possibly close combat to finish off units to make sure that you can actually make use of its ability. The Wraithlord can take 2 Eldar heavy weapons, giving it a lot of versatility. Can take the Ghostglaive, of course, which you're always going to take, and either 2 Flamers or 2 Shuriken Catapults, of which the Flamers are the better option. As for its cost, it does cost 160 points, which isn't bad for what you get, although you do have to use it correctly to get the most value out of it. And again, when you compare this thing to a Hornet or, even like a Viper or a Warwalker, those are going to be much more cost efficient for their given role, which is going to be, carrying Bright Lances, dealing with heavy targets, because they have Ballistic Skill 3. So you do have to use the Wraithlord in a way which makes advantage of its greater toughness and combat ability. As for its keywords, it's a monster, so it can shoot units it's engaged with, which is actually very useful, and I've used this many times to great effect. Okay, so as for the Wraithlord's strengths and weaknesses, it has some pretty cool strengths. So it is extremely tough, and a lot of people don't consider this when taking it. They just kind of consider damage, but having something toughness 11 with a 2+ save on the field that your opponent has to, deal with can be a very great tool at your disposal. It also has a lot of versatile heavy weapon options, so it can deal with pretty much any type of target. It's effective in combat as well, so yeah, it hits on 4+, but it's so tough that most units it engages in combat are going to be wounding it on 5s or 6s. So that's important. Even Terminators with Power Fists are going to be wounding this thing on 5s. So oftentimes, if you're able to shoot your heavy weapons into Terminators and you charge right in there, with some support, the Wraithlord can come out on top. I actually like throwing Fortune on him as well, throwing him into Terminators and just watching Terminators flail uselessly against the Wraithlord's tough Wraithbone hide. However, it does have a couple of weaknesses. So it does hit on a 4+, and that is something that we take for granted on Wraithguard because we can just put a Spirit Seer in there and they hit on 3s with the +1 to hit. But Wraithlords, the Spirit Seer isn't really a great option for it, so we often just have to, suck it up and hit on 4+ with both its shooting and close combat. It also has trouble wounding toughness 11+ models in close combat. Because, of course, the Ghostglaive only has strength 10, so wounding on 5s after hitting on 4s is pretty low odds. Okay, so what about its combos and synergies? So if you do have Doom in your list via Eldrad, Doom helps the Wraithlord wound tougher targets easier. So if you do have this in your list, most of the time you're probably not going to have it, but if you do, +1 to wound is always good. Fortune makes it extremely tough and hard to remove. I recommend throwing Fortune on this guy every chance you can get. Makes him very hard to deal with, especially against weapons that are strength 10 or less. So basically most of the missile launcher equivalents in the game are going to be wounding on 6s with Fortune. Even things like Last Cannons will be wounding on 4+. Spirit Seers, although an expensive package in my opinion, just because of the fact that you do have to pay the cost of the Wraithlord on top of the Spirit Seer, can give it +1 to hit and lethal hits, which is Also good. Now, something I have been thinking about, it's a little bit expensive, more of a fun thing, if you're not also running a Death Jest in your list, is giving the Spiritseer Fate's Messenger. So if you do want to run a Spiritseer with the Wraithlord, you can. But give it Fate's Messenger, because this will make it even tougher. So this will allow it to hit better, wound better, and of course, make better saves in your opponent's turn. Vipers can remove enemy cover, which, helps against certain ranged weapons the Wraithlord might be carrying. Shroud Runners can mark targets for lethal hits as well, and Guide can help it hit more reliably at both range and in combat. So this is something that lasts one full round. So Guide is actually pretty good on this guy. I know many of you haven't thought about this, but if you wanted to, for example, charge this guy into a unit of 5 Terminators, you could basically guide him up, reroll your hits when you're going in, reroll your hits in close combat when you're attacking in close combat, and then during your opponent's turn, you can reroll your hits again during their fight phase. So yeah, Guide is actually very useful on the Wraithlord in the right circumstances. So let's go ahead and talk about why the conventional Wraithlord build in 10th edition may actually be trash. So a common Wraithlord build in 10th edition so far has been to take double Bright Lances on the Wraithlord. So this is, the common thing that people do, right? Bright Lances have the most target value. They're great at killing the most expensive points-wise models on the board. So therefore, the Bright Lances are best on pretty much anything, right? Because taking the Bright Lances increases the value of the model considerably. For example, if you take Scatter Lasers, you're only being able to kill light infantry, which is not cost effective for 160 points. So that has been the conventional wisdom so far, and as of a week ago, I would have agreed with you guys. I would have said, yeah, the Bright Lances are the way to go. Maybe missile launchers, but for the most part, Bright Lances. However, after a series of games with these guys, using Bright Lances, in which the Bright Lances have essentially done nothing all game. Now, some of that was because of pad rolling, but some of it was also just because Wraithlords don't hit that well. They hit on a 4+. So, even normally, that's sometimes going to fail, right? You have 2 dice. On average, you should get at least 1 hit. And with a reroll, you should definitely get at least 1 hit. But sometimes it just doesn't happen, and when the odds are like that, and your Wraithlord does nothing that turn, that can be a really sour experience. Now, I've played a lot of games with Wraithlords, and this doesn't happen every turn, but it at least happens once per game. At least once per game, my Wraithlord just totally misses all of their Bright Lance shots. Which sucks, right? And if you think about it in the terms of a 5-turn game, that's 20% of the time that your Wraithlord's range damage is doing nothing. Now, on the other hand, I've had Warwalkers with double Bright Lances and Vipers with double Bright Lances that rarely miss. They rarely miss after the reroll. So, Warwalkers, I've had them pretty much all game, just even hitting on 3s, right? And you do notice this after a while. Sometimes you will roll 3s versus 4s, and that's going to be apparent after a while of using Wraithlords side by side with things like Warwalkers. The Warwalkers are going to hit way more reliably because they have that +1 to hit. Wraithlords are Ballistic Skill 4, and they don't hit that often. Also, when your opponent realizes that, you're hitting on 4+, that opens up a lot of shenanigan options for them. So a lot of times a good opponent, noticing that you hit on 4+, will say, oh, you know what? I'm going to pop smoke this turn because I know you're going to be hitting on 5s, and that means your Wraithlord is just probably going to whiff. So hitting on 4s is especially unreliable, especially against hit debuffs like Smokescreen, Lightning Fast Reactions, Close Combat, etc. And that's also the other thing, right? If your Wraithlord's stuck in close combat with another monster or vehicle, you're also going to be hitting on 5+. So what I've actually found is that double Missile Launcher or double Shuriken Cannon are a lot better against the targets the Wraithlord can effectively engage in combat. So Wraithlords in close combat, they have Strength 10, which means they're probably going to be better off with the Missile Launchers if you're going against large targets. So if you want to, fight Terminators and stuff like that, the Strength 10 AP -2 is just enough to pop a Terminator with each hit. You're still wounding on 2+, even though you're hitting on 5s with the Missile Launchers in close combat. You are going to be able to, on average, do just about as much damage as you would with a Bright Lance. Now, do keep in mind, though, when you are firing at range, you have the option with the missile launcher of doing the blast. So to clear light infantry and things like this. And what that means is the Wraithlord's very effective at clearing out screening units. So if your opponent wants to screen out the Wraithlord from one of their more valuable units with a cheap infantry unit or something like that, you can bring up 2 flamers, and you can also fire off the plasma shots on those missile launchers and deal considerable damage. Remember, the flamers are auto hits, and, with the extra hits you get from the blast keyword on the missile launcher, you should be able to clear out a unit of 10 light infantry pretty effectively. Or at the least, whittle them down enough so that they can no longer properly screen that target. And then you can charge the Wraithlord in, use a fate dice, get that extra long charge in, and finish off whatever important unit they have. So I've used this several times to get rid of things like Tau battlesuits, Stern Guard veterans, and things like that. So again, if your opponent is screening out their more expensive units with, less valuable units, you can kind of use the flamers and the missile launchers to wipe those out. Also, if you give them shuriken cannons are just great because the amount of times you miss with the Wraithlord will be partially made up with the sustained hits. So yeah, you may miss 3 of those 6 shots, but one of those on average will be a 6, so you'll get 4 shots out of it. It's basically like having ballistic skill 3+. Pretty much, right? Obviously, not exactly, because, something with ballistic skill 3+ with shuriken cannons would be just a little bit more effective, would probably get 1 additional hit over, ballistic skill 4+, but still, it's about equal. And shuriken cannons are good at dealing with medium to heavy infantry, and the Wraithlord is good at dealing with medium to heavy infantry or, other units in close combat as well. And at least if you are in close combat with the shuriken cannons, they're hitting on a 5+, but again, because you have sustained hits, you're actually getting much more value out of that weapon. Star cannons aren't a bad option either. They're really good at popping things that are toughness 4 and 2 wounds, so a lot of jet bike type models or bike type models that have 2 wounds are really good at. So, Eldar Reavers, they can pop those pretty much 1 per shot, which is nice, and they can wound on 2s. So star cannons aren't bad either, but they do lack the volume of fire that both the missile launcher and the shuriken cannons have against infantry. So what is the role of the Wraithlord in an Eldar army, and how do you actually make the most out of it? So if it's not a unit that can sit in the back, shoot bright lances at the enemy, and also defend your backline, then how should a Wraithlord operate? Now, I do think it's still good in that role. I just don't think the bright lances are the best choice. So that's why I like taking missile launchers, because you can kind of do both. If you need the Wraithlord to be a bruiser who dominates a certain area of the board, maybe in the mid board, then the shuriken cannons and missile launchers are going to be better for those roles. They're also great at defending areas of the board, especially near objectives with your more fragile units. So they are still good as a defending unit, especially if you try for a heroic intervention or something like that. It does cost 2 command points, but rarely will an opponent want to take on a charging Wraithlord with a smaller unit that is typically designed to kill lighter targets. So in conclusion, Wraithlords are powerful monsters capable of ripping anything toughness 10 or less apart in seconds. Due to the fact that they do struggle versus heavier targets, it might be better to go against the conventional 10th edition wisdom of giving it the double bright lance and instead equipping it to deal better with heavy infantry, which means, either missile launchers or, of course, shuriken cannons. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to help support the channel, I have free trials activated, and a free trial will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who like talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description. I also have a channel store page as well as an Amazon affiliate link if you guys want to get some discounted Eldar miniatures or want to grab some Eldar inspired apparel to rep at your local game store. And I will also leave those links in the description. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next video and peace out. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.